Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and welcome to the third installment of Gacha Economics. So in Gacha Economics 103, this is going to be the one that's definitely most practical for the player, especially if you aren't paying attention to little quality of life improvements that we're getting slowly and incrementally, because some of these are actually practical game changers, and I'm going to teach you these economics trading tips and teach you how to find the stock market of Wodev and how to manipulate the prices. This isn't cheating, this is just Gumi naturally expanding their economy. And I personally think, in observing this over the course of about 4 or 5 years through various FFBE games, that despite the complexity of these economies, they actually do a pretty good job of managing them and incrementally dealing with supply and demand. My first video in this series, Gumi Economics 101, was mainly talking about how those relationships change when they introduce a new set of materials, a new highest tier of power. Because you've suddenly got brand new materials that there's a high demand for because a lot of units need them to awaken, and you need to awaken to catch up with the Joneses. But there's also an intentionally limited supply, especially for the first month. And then as the weeks go on, about every 2 weeks, or maybe every month, there's a new way to get them. And at first, the first of these that are released, the currency exchange rate relative to other things you could buy for the currency is pretty bad. But as it becomes more normalized that they show up in different places in the Mog Shop, you actually become able to buy them for currencies that are a lot more reasonable over time. And I expect that this will balance out to a place where you can have a reasonable free-to-play experience with this system within about 3 months. That was my thesis, based on my experience of them doing this several times within FFBE, but also the EX experience and the Blossom drought that existed for maybe 3 months that many of us have experienced at least. So let's talk in depth and let's take a look at the Wodev stock market. So first we have the shop. And these are the things that people usually think of as currencies. You have, turtles, I guess, are a currency that can be traded for Gil, and you can pay Gil for certain things in the item shop. But a lot of things are going to require Visior. However, most things are going to require free Visior, which can be earned in-game, and also, when you do purchase Visior, you tend to get a lot of free Visior and some paid Visior. That is because paid Visior is usually associated with really cost-effective and powerful uses. This is one of the ways that this game has a pay-to-win element to it. Paid Visior itself existing and having such a disproportionate value to regular Visior is, a thing. There is also a way, I'm pretty sure, within the shop that you can take a certain amount, at least at first, of paid Visior and exchange it maybe at like a 10 times or 5 times exchange rate for free Visior, which gives you a lot of pull power. It does make you miss out on certain things that you could get with paid Visior that are kind of special. So it's not necessarily a great exchange, but it can give you a lot of pull power if you're desperate, and is something that you can do like once or twice per account. Looking at the Mog Shop, this is actually the stock market, and I've been scrolling through this for a while, and you'll notice that every single one of these has an independent currency, as well as its own diverse set of things that it can get. And especially with events, you get a lot of overlap. And as you get a lot of overlap, you begin to get a lot of ways to get a lot of items that were previously scarce. As you can see, because I've been farming a bunch of just a ridiculous amount of Dragon Quest event medals, I've been able to collect a number of resources, turtles, and EXP cubes that I want to hoard for the future by just slamming that every day, and background repeats have helped. And then looking at all of these other things, some of these are going to be more relevant than others, but right now I'm just showing you that there is a absolutely ridiculous amount of different currencies that in many cases can be exchanged for each other. And in these two tabs especially, there are actually 5 currencies within the tab, which is absolutely absurd. So now let's get into the fun part, and let's start talking about how you can, like, effectively exchange these, and how you can get the most for them. And a lot of this is going to happen in the item exchange shop because of exchange rates. So if you aren't building a lot of MR units, and I would do this very sparingly because you will still need these for MR units, you could get Rainbow Vision Spears that way if you're desperate. Never do this. Never trade for Rainbow Fragments of Thought. In terms of awakening materials, you need these all so often. Even if your account really isn't focusing on an element, I wouldn't advise exchanging them because of a 2-to-1 exchange rate. Same for the Fragments of Thought. But for a lot of these awakening materials, it's really easy to just, because of how many energy pots we've gotten recently, to just slam really hard level 3, level 4, and level 6 of any of these and just hoard them, because once you have a lot in certain elements, you can begin to exchange for the elements of which you become deficient. Like, look at how many light souls I have here. I could give elements 50 of the 3-star awakenings so many times off of all that extra farming I did on light, and that was probably just like 1 or 2 just me maxing out and throwing 25 large pots at light level 3. And you can see I kind of have a similar situation in level 4 with slightly different elements. Same thing for this stuff. Looking at some of the exchange rates for these things, they trade down 1-to-1, which doesn't feel good. I guess if you're desperate, but it's also really easy to farm these, as you can see from the fact that I have a lot of them. And this is another thing, and I'll show you places where you can effectively quickly farm these, and part of it's just they build up after you've played for a while. But one thing that is really, really big and kind of recent within the last couple months is being able to trade for faint memories. So let's trade down 5. No, let's trade down 1. Okay, 5. Let's trade down 5 red faint memories into... I'm sorry, let's trade 4. Fuck me. Okay, we've traded 4, we got 8. So let's trade 8 down. We have 16. So let's trade those down into blue. And now we have 32. So what this means is that the most effective way, especially to farm blues at this point, but to a certain degree purples and even yellows, is to go directly for reds. Ignore the yellow rooms, ignore farming story quests for awakening memories anymore. The best way is always going to be to wait for 2x in the brutal rooms and just slam those. It's easy to get... Okay, here's another trick. Just a quick interjection. While that was historically true, they actually did even more than I thought in their change of the UI of the Trust Stone system. So blues are now 3 times as much, but I believe that the purples are actually 5 times as much. So it actually makes you lose 750 experience points in value, which means less considering the numbers are a lot bigger, but you now should actually just make purples and use them to level stuff up. It's not effective to trade blues for purples, it's not effective anymore to trade purples for blues, just make the shit and level it up. It's super simple, no extra economics required anymore. You do lose some value trading greens up to blue, but you also lose a lot of tapping time, and, you know, while that's not necessarily economically efficient, your time is also a valuable resource, so maybe you should consider that. These trade down 5-to-1, so let's just trade down 5 of these. From gold to silver, now we have 25. Now we're going to trade those 25 into bronze. And now we have 125 bronze. So getting 1 gold can get you 125 bronze. And this was something that was really important in leveling trust runes early on, understanding that you could exchange those between each other. And this is something I predicted, and something that I predict will happen again as we in Global get really close to Reincarnation. But a lot of the materials, like I think probably blossoms, broadstones, maybe branded tablets, stuff like that, elemental statues, It's also worth pointing out that, much like what I said in my Gumi Economics 101 video, a lot of the resources that I've discussed so far have undergone a massive deflation because there is a huge amount of supply if you look at all the places that some of these items are offered compared to the amount of demand in terms of, if you're free to play especially and you aren't building a lot of characters because you aren't pulling everyone, then you don't really have the same demand that exists in supply for many of these things. This is often a side effect of a leveling system existing for a while. It will get more generous over time. But also, this tends to ramp up especially fast to kind of allow people to finish off characters in the space of time before a new level cap is introduced. And then all of those new items that are introduced then will go through we'll go through roughly the same cycle that I've described here, where at first systems are unwieldy. There aren't many places to buy things. The resources that you have to buy those things are particularly valuable. And eventually you will get cheaper and cheaper relatively currencies, or easier to farm currencies that you can buy these things in, at least on a month-to-month basis. And then eventually they're going to release QOLs, new rooms, new updates to rooms, new updates to the way rooms work, that are completely going to decimate the economies for those items to the point where A, you either always have way too many, or B, you have enough of some of them and the exchange for each other that you have all of them if you need them for all intents and purposes. So let's talk about some other stuff, like these metals that trade 1-to-1 for any shard, or any non-limited shard. You might really be tempted to use those on units, but you should definitely use them on vision cards. However, it goes even deeper than that. Of course, you're thinking the double cost vision cards, but when you look at the only really way that we can tell their values relative to each other is through this system. And in this system, the double cost espers are 200, but you also notice that regular espers are 100. But then if you continue to scroll down past the espers, you'll see the universal vision cards are 50. And then if you continue to scroll down past that, you'll see elemental vision cards, which are also 50. And if you continue to scroll past that, you'll even run into job-based vision cards, which are also 50. Which means that if you are building up these metals by potentially buying the free VC shards in the guild metal shop, you can get 10 of those a day. You can build up to effectively get your job-based VCs, your elemental VCs, your non-elemental VCs built up pretty easily. But espers, and especially, and I shouldn't have to tell you the double cost espers, of course, you've already probably figured that out, but that's really the place where these have the maximum value for being at an equal cost to everything else. If you are really nitpicky about getting the very best value out of a token, this is how you do it. The main thing is espers. If you don't have any chaos espers to level up, maybe save some of these resources if you can. But espers in general are just a good investment. You can also buy these units, which will get you 40 of their mind spheres, 40 soul metals, in addition to a rainbow vision sphere, which can be pretty handy. That refreshes every month. You got a Blossom of Paradise for 5k in here. I don't buy it as much anymore because they've gotten pretty common in other ways. But this is also the shop where you can get, sadly, VCs don't have the equivalent of mind spheres, so you're just getting this exchange currency. But if you actually do regularly use that exchange currency to build up VCs, you'll understand a lot of what I'm saying is trying to save you as much of that currency as possible, because it can be kind of hard to come by, especially compared to soul metals. And there's really nothing in here for soul metals that is worth buying at all. Some of these prices are ridiculous. There are a couple of 80 cost units that are potentially kind of cool. And there is actually a trick with a couple of those that once you get them into, let's see, you can buy 10 of their shards for 50, but if you have them past 99, you're going to get 10 mind spheres. So you spend 50 and you get 10 back. So effectively, they become discounted once you get them into kind of the 120 EX area, which is kind of a way to get like a discount rain or something. But a lot of those units aren't super useful, so you're probably just going to want to trade for Mind Spheres. It's also worth noting that for the high score medals, as I just showed you, they trade kind of at a 2-to-1 value, but it costs 5 of them to trade up to a pink, so you never want to buy yellows for any reason with your high score challenge medals. It's just a bad exchange rate. You would do so much better off getting and even saving up for the pinks. And that is a really good way to bank value for building trust stones in the future. I've just been kind of overwhelmed because it's, with background farming especially, and with all the free energy pots that they've been giving us, if you're diligent about getting those, and at the end of the day, you're just throwing like 25 pots at Glory is actually one of the fastest ways, one of the fastest rooms to clear, generally speaking. So if you just spam Glory, if you do that enough, you're going to have enough books, enough trust stone shards and all of that stuff that you can trade over for other elements if you have to. But also remember that it doesn't have to be the same letter to level up passives. And honestly, with trust stones the way that they are, leveling up passives is the biggest grind point. So that's just general farming at that point. So you can do that in just one room. And of course, that's going to build you up a bunch of books for whatever Glory books are, and you can trade those in for other books. But honestly, with as many ways as we've had to get books lately, there's been no reason to. And the same is true for a lot of EX Awakening materials, which is kind of my point that I was making in 101, is that slowly they roll out new ways, and slowly they increase supply, and slowly demand increases, and they increase supply more, and then all of a sudden you're in a place where you have an absurd amount of so many of these awakening materials. Unfortunately, prisms are still being used kind of throughout this and are still a bit of a roadblock, but we have more ways than ever to get them. Every event usually allows you to trade for up to 40. You can get them from select quests now, up to 150 for the fragments per month. There's just a bunch of ways to get them. You can trade for 20 friend medals or 20 guild medals for any of them. And, you know, the system definitely wasn't like that at the beginning. So incrementally, as we have more and more demand for these things, they add or devalue things that are already in their system. And if you pay attention to what they devalue and how to kind of game that to min-max your farming, you're actually going to do a little bit better in this game. And I think it's kind of worth it to know some of those tips and tricks about the internal economics of the game. So now it's time to get into a slightly different topic for this video, which is kind of, first I'm going to have to start by refreshing you with some information from Gumi Economics 101. Older players have been playing this game for 2 years or so, that remember when that came out, that pulled some of the first EX units, probably also remember that you had, like, in that first month, 2 Broadstones if you didn't pay for anything of the UR variety. So you couldn't even EX a full set of 3 units, I believe, in that first month without maybe buying a Broadstone. Now, within a month or two, even more casual players that maybe didn't get every Broadstone that was potentially available that the previous month, they're just not playing that hard. Maybe it took them like 3 months to get the full EX UR team. And in that 3 months, though, those Broadstones were kind of rare to get. Blossoms have been pretty scarce throughout, but they were really scarce at the beginning. Like, holy shit, it was a meme how badly we needed Blossoms, and how, shut up and take my viz we were about any time they were offering Blossoms. Just get them, you need them bad. But, like, I don't think I have gone below 15 Blossoms on any account, and I'm not, like, leveling up every MR unit I have, but, unless your name is Corel, Varush, or Velric. As part of that, we're going to talk about the changes and the additions that JP made in the first month of the Reincarnation system. And then after that, I'm going to find some more JP footage scan through, and finding JPQOL is like a needle in a haystack because it very rarely gets talked about. It's very rarely hype. But hopefully resource scarcity has been enough of a thing that people will mention it when there's a new way to get items, so I can show you how this graph is slowly becoming more accessible over time, as follows my hypothesis in Gumi Economics 101. Now, I think that the thing that makes this system different, and the thing that won't necessarily be helped out by this quite as easily, is just how many times you have to reincarnate a character to get their max stats. And this could be adjusted from a number of ways, just giving them more stats per reincarnation so that they hit that threshold faster. And this is definitely a thing that could be and should be, by a wise and prescient Gumi, fixed before this system is released on global. But let's get back over to Econ 101 and let's talk about some Umber raised footage.
Another way of breaking down what were previously bottlenecks by flooding the market and making all of those previous awakening items basically economically very cheap, very easy for us to get in a high supply, as opposed to being very highly in demand and being in low supply. After they do that and make it really easy for you to get to 120, maybe even see some new ways to get shards coming, they're going to start introducing more and more ways to get horns and scrolls. And in their first month, as a part of the first month's updates, they've already started to introduce some of these. Umbra has a video going over some of the ones that you can get in the Mog shop. I do want to point out that while 500 of this currency for a UR horn is ridiculous, that is exactly the same price that Blossoms currently are in the store. And I think, as I've demonstrated throughout this video, Blossoms are not very valuable. And I think that this was the first way that we were given within the EX meta to get Blossoms on like a regular basis. So this was also by far, I mean, just look through the video at all the other ways you can get Blossoms, by far the most expensive way in one of the most expensive resources to get them. So I actually think that, you know, this is a sign that, again, it's going to be a little bad at first, and then we're going to get some of these other ways. And I would expect that the UR horns, maybe, since they're costing them this way from the beginning, that they may be somehow equivalent to kind of the treatment that Blossoms have gotten, which is something I talk about all throughout the video. Actually, rewatching Umber's video, I noticed something that I noticed when I was watching the video also, that's kind of an example of what I'm talking about here. He talks about how they just introduced a monthly medal system, which I think we got in global first, and ours, as he notes in the video, we can summon vision card shards, which is by far the most Chad way to spend those medals. Absolutely. Another thing that I noticed in watching this video is that, so he's talking about the friend medal shop. Okay, for one thing, I have either mentioned or will mention that, you know, prisms used to be 250 medals per prism, and then they dropped them down to 20. Well, it looks like JP has them for 10, so that's probably going to go down in the future.
One of the first things I found was this Lunar New Year's bundle, where you can buy a horn, most importantly, but a lot of other awakening materials, including 200 UR scrolls per, for 2k viz a piece. I think this is going to be a really good deal going in, especially for people who are a little bit more like me, not thinking about pulling as hard into this time frame and are probably just going to be saving biz. We definitely have the biz to spend on something like this. Now, it is worth noting this is Lunar New Year. We may not get as good a deal, but this is the kind of deals that they were giving JP even like 1 month, maybe a little bit past 1 month into the system. I don't know, this is early January, so that's over a month from today as I'm recording this. But, you know, we have holidays too. There are opportunities that we'll see something like this, and if you see something like this, this would at least get 3 characters into 120 and maybe even, into 140 and maybe even into a couple reincarnations for 6k viz, assuming you have their other resources. And I think that's a pretty good deal, especially even for free-to-plays. We can save 6k viz. So after spending a lot of time pouring through pretty much every one of Umbra Ray's videos that he's released since Reincarnation, you're welcome for the channel views, by the way. And if you appreciate me spending my free time doing this, scrubbing through Umbra's videos to find you a concise answer to a question, you could support the channel. Stick around to the end. I'll have some links on the screen, or just skip to the end. But in this video,
obviously, this is kind of interesting. Some orbs for this for these characters. Fullmetal Alchemist hasn't really given away a ton of stuff. It hasn't felt the most generous, but it also hasn't felt the worst. I mean, it does have a story to it, so it does have a little more effort put into it. But you can get a cool 20 for 30,000 credits, so that's nice and everything. But hey, take a look at this. There are some actual rewards that are damn worth it this time. First of all, a UR horn, which up until this point haven't been really farmable from many places, especially for free-to-players. So it's nice to see, even it being 50,000, this is quite doable in a raid event.
We noticed that Umbra is sitting on 4 UR horns. This isn't, I know that there are a couple of units that he has upgraded already. This is around month 1, or maybe close to month 2 in his progress into this. I'm assuming he bought those 3 UR horns that I just mentioned, but he also has a lot of UR scrolls. We don't get to see his MR scrolls, but those haven't necessarily been hard to get from the beginning, so they're not really an issue. And I don't know how much money Umbra spends on the game. I do know he's a diligent player, so it is entirely possible that a free-to-play could be sitting pretty good with a few units upgraded and still have some resources on hand to upgrade units into the future, or a few that they like. Not necessarily that Umbra has reincarnated the most characters of any JP player, but I think that kind of the pace that he's going at is similar to the pace that I would be going at. And if I saw those resources and also started seeing those resources popping up in raids, just as I predicted only about 2 months in, then they're probably going to be in regular event metal shops by 3-4 months. And then it might actually become not trivial to get them, but not a really hard block that you have to spend money, or at least viz, to overcome. And that's ultimately what I hope for the system. Unfortunately, this is pretty much all the information that I could find from scrubbing through his screens, because people don't talk about how much things cost in the shop a lot. It's not a very exciting topic if you're not doing a Gumi economics video. But, yeah. I am.